In this video, I want to talk about the 100 Iterations project. Briefly, I just want you to choose a subject and then create and assemble 100 separate and distinct images of that subject. The goal of this project is to help you broaden your image making capacity while also developing your divergent and creative thinking skills. This is one of my favorite projects. Here, you start from a single point and move out in 360 degrees of conceptual exploration. Now, the first thing that you're going to need to do is choose a subject. Your subject can be a real thing, like a cat, or a concept like fear, as we see here. Choosing a subject that has multiple meanings opens up many avenues for visual exploration, such as ring, or cold, home, or space. Your subject could also be complex, like the idea of coming home, or the idea of a conversation between friends. In this project, we are really going to be exploring image type. In the Theory of Imagery lecture, we talked about the idea of an icon. Here's a project where the student explored visual variations on the letter form A. This is what I would call a formal exploration. There are a couple of visual metaphors in here, but this is about exploring the possibilities in form. Another image type that we talked about is an index or an associated image. For example, in this 100 iterations of the idea of home, we see all sorts of associated imagery, like a key or a birdcage. Another type of imagery that we talked about was the visual metaphor. In this 100 iterations, we see the Acme logo interpreted in all sorts of different market segments. Every single logo incorporates the ACME letter forms of the logo. This, I think, is quite brilliant. But I've also asked you to include some other image types: pattern or texture, photography, typography, an image sequence, and a diagram. Let's see how another student incorporated some of these ideas. Samantha, as you can see, has chosen the subject of skulls. Across the top, we see that she's explored the idea of skulls and food to create these interesting visual metaphors. Underneath that, she's created a pattern. Using Adobe Illustrator, she's created some interesting effects. Below that, we see an image sequence. An image sequence is just a couple of images put together that suggest the passing of time. As you can see here, Samantha's also included some photography of some other works that she's created around the subject of skulls. A little below that, Samantha has explored typography and yet another row of visual metaphors, this time skulls as seen by the fashion industry. These are all very well done. Which brings up the question, do I have to create all the images myself? Well, Samantha, in the last example, was one of my illustration students. I would expect her to create all 100 images. However, not everyone doing this project is an illustrator. Let me show you another example of another student who approached this project a little bit differently. Shelby chose the subject of fear. In this layout, she'd started with the center square and wrote her subject. On the squares around that square, she wrote the different things or situations someone might find fearful. And then she built out her imagery based upon those ideas. The imagery itself varies. You see a mixture of typography, photography, visual metaphor, pictograms, and patterns. This becomes an exercise in not just a visual exploration of a subject, but of visual storytelling in the way that she's laid this out, in the imagery that she's chosen. She's been very economical with her imagery, limiting her color palette, but being very clear as to the concept behind each image. This is very different from the one that we just looked at, but I think just as successful. The next thing I want to talk about is the visual research process. I want to caution you about rushing to your sketchbook too soon to do sketches. Let me show you an example of the visual research process in action. First of all, let's state our starting condition or end goal. Let's imagine for a second that we want to create a graphic icon for a dog treat maker. Your end goal may be fairly clear, but sometimes it helps to restate it in different words. Once you have your starting goal, research your subject. Now, that research shouldn't only include visual research. I mentioned in a previous video the importance of lists and mind maps. Let's discuss mind maps in a little bit more detail here. A mind map, as we see here, is a branching holistic exploration of our subject, starting with the subject in the center and branching out from there. But I have a particular way that I like to organize this. For example, Here's a slightly expanded version of a mind map, but I've divided this into 4 quadrants. I'm going to go into this in more detail in just a moment. The mind map is really helpful in expanding our understanding of our subject. We can start to think about things like narrative. Once we've explored our subjects through visual research and mind maps, it's time to start doing our own visual exploration. It is only during this visual exploration that things start to occur. And here we have one idea that may solve our starting condition. But we can't stop there. This is just one idea. You have to get busy and create a lot more. Here's the visual metaphor exercise that I would like you to do. I want you to draw a visual metaphor that combines these 2 ideas, mechanical and natural. These are 2 very contrasting ideas. We should be able to come up with some interesting combinations. The first thing I want you to do is create a mind map. And again, let's divide this mind map into sections. The first are the properties, the physical properties of the item that I'm trying to explore. The second section are the associated items. These are the items that may not be mechanical in themselves, but are associated with mechanical items. These 2 categories roughly are associated with the icon and index categories of semiotics. The next category that I like to include are the behaviors or uses. The more specific the item you're exploring, the easier this section would be. The last section that I'd like to explore are the cultural associations with this subject. What I have here is just the beginning. For this to be a successful exercise, we need to include way more than what I have here. Let's do the next one, natural. Again, we'll use the 4 categories. And again, I hope you have way more than I have here. Once you've done this exploration, it's time to begin sketching. Here, for example, are my first few sketches from my mechanical category. I've kept my shapes simple, as close to geometric as possible. Here's my sketch for my natural forms. Again, I would hope you would do even more exploration than you see here. Finally, let me end with a couple of visual metaphors that I came up with. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I could have created way more than this. What I'd like you to do is draw some visual metaphors using our mechanical and natural themes and send them to me.